Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Hello, Eric. How are you doing?
I'm doing as good as I can.
Very nice. And we have a guest in the studio today, a repeat guest, a friend of the show, Josh Goldberg. Hey, Josh.
Hey, thanks for having me again, guys.
Absolutely. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about what you've been working on lately, which is Flint, an experimental linter. And I'm going to let you describe what it is, but I think by now people who listen to the show know you're really big into linting. In fact, I feel like when linting comes to mind, I think of Josh. So I would direct people, if you want some more background, to listen to our State of the Linting 2025 episode, where Josh goes into a lot of detail about the landscape of linters. And in that episode, we talked a little bit about Flint, but at that point, it was pretty early on in its ideation process, and now you're a bit further on. So we wanted to invite you on and get an update for where Flint is at. So maybe that's a good place to start. So for people who've never heard of Flint before, what is it?
Sure. Flint is an experimental linter. It has a bunch of hypotheses for things we think could be done differently or better in a linter made for web developers, primarily but not exclusively JavaScript and TypeScript folks, and it implements those hypotheses to test them out to see if they actually would be better, why or why not.
Okay, so that brings up a good question, which is there anything obviously wrong with today's linters? Like what is the motivation to try and experiment and create a new type of linter?
Ugh, I love this question. Before I answer it, I do want to give a necessary caveat, which is that the linting space, I think, is pretty darn friendly. I'm on good terms, I think, with a lot of the other people in the space, folks from Biome and OXLint, and I'm on the ESLint team. So this is not some sort of competitive capitalist anger or takeover attempt. This is us trying to all make a better experience for everyone. And I feel obliged to give that caveat because I've seen people misinterpret things like Flint as, oh no, he hates everything or everyone's mad at each other. And that's absolutely not the case here.
Yeah, it seems like even just based on reading the documentation, this is an exploration of like, how can we make the ecosystem better for linters? Because we've talked about a little bit about this before, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but you've got native linters on one side of the equation. Like this is like Biome or OXLint that are like written in Rust, right? But so are the rules in the plugins. And that brings up a developer experience issue where me as Kamran or Eric, if we want to write our own lint rule, we have to learn Rust. And neither of us know Rust. And I'm sure it's pretty similar for someone that might be listening. And then on the other side, you've got ESLint, which is pure JavaScript. And there's some friction with using it with TypeScript. There's a difference between typed rules and untyped rules. And so there's friction there. And it seems like Flint is kind of sitting in the middle. So do you want to explain a little bit more about what problems Flint is trying to solve here?
Yeah, you touched on two really good ones. I'll start with the performance one. ESLint is written, as you said, in JavaScript, pure JavaScript, which means it runs at JIT, just-in-time, JIT speeds. That means that it's real hard to get ESLint to be fast when you have a code base with thousands, hundreds of thousands, even a million files. On the other hand, you have these new native speed linters that can actually work very quickly at that scale. They're 2, 5, 10, sometimes up to 100 times faster. But then, like you said, they're written in a language that the people using it aren't actually writing. And even with AI, it's kind of difficult. It's a bit of a blocker for folks to approach, well, I'm a TypeScript developer. If I need a custom rule, which most companies that have thousands plus size projects do and need, well, that's a big step. Furthermore, I'd say in addition to there being a positive correlation between size of code base and need for custom lint rules, there's also a positive correlation with need for the code in the code base to interact with those lint rules. The kind of canonical example that I have seen a lot of times is a company has a design system, and then the lint rules need to literally import, like ESM import from some part of the design system's Node.js API to, let's say, validate that stuff is from a allowed set or help with migrations to or within the design system. And so That's one of the many things we're trying to work on with Flint is, can we have a linter where the core and the rules are written in TypeScript for approachability and interoperability? But for the slow parts of linting, such as computing type information, can we defer to native speed things like TypeScript Go so that you still have something of a good performance attribute at scale?
Okay, that's interesting. So you're saying that part of Flint will be written in native code, kind of similar to a native linter, but only the parts of it that really contribute to making it faster. And then a lot of the plugins or rules will be still written in TypeScript, so a TypeScript developer or JavaScript developer can write their own custom rules. Is that accurate?
Accurate. That's what I call a hybrid linter. It's partially in one space for approachability, partially in the other space for performance.
That's cool. So what does that really enable as part of, like, I guess, the developer experience?
Well, it's a lot easier to write a custom rule, both intellectually, like the rules are just TypeScript. You can write one in under 100 lines of code, and interoperability, if that's a word, from, importing from your design system as the example. It also means that if you want to learn from the linter or contribute to it, it's a lot more approachable. It's been really impressive to see the communities built up around the native speed projects like Bio and OXLint and RSLint and such. But at the end of the day, you have a lot more potential contributors when you are writing in TypeScript for TypeScript developers. So part of the Flint hope is that we can see whether you get a lot more activity from the community and a lot more, fully featured, long-term maintained rules by writing in TypeScript.
Nice. Is there now going to be a disparity? I mean, obviously, I don't know if you can be at the same speeds as something that's a fully native tool when you have an interop with, a JavaScript runtime. What kind of trade-offs are you having to make there?
Yeah, it's tough. We actually haven't implemented any of the native speed parts. It's mostly been early stage explorations, for which I want to shout out Avred, the creator of TSGoLint, one of the TypeScript ESLint team members. Avred's been doing a bunch of wacky prototypes in and around native speed and virtual file hosts and such. We're never going to be as fast as a full native speed linter. Full stop. It's physically impossible. We have all these workarounds and cool things. Like we have a native cache that works with typed linting, unlike any other linter, which really, really helps once you've got a warm cache. But the numbers that I like to quote to people is, okay, let's say that ESLint or equivalent takes 10 minutes on your code base and OXLint takes 10 seconds. If Flint were to take 30 seconds, would that be an acceptable trade-off for the benefits of Flint? How about if Flint takes 1 minute? At what scale of speed is it no longer acceptable? And I think that actually 1 to 10 to 100 sort of scale is probably what we'll land at in the best possible case.
Yeah, and I think it is worth the trade-off, personally, because having type-aware linting that is ergonomic, I think is a huge thing.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good point, because we had talked about in the previous episode some nuance with what is type-aware linting technically under the hood. And I was going through some of the Flint documentation. Flint is type-aware just for every rule. There's no distinction between non-type-aware and type-aware rules. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. ESLint itself, the core project, by design, this is not a criticism, does not support types or any form of cross-file information. We actually have an issue on the ESLint issue tracker where we're starting to look into that. That means that import analysis, detecting cycles or validating that paths are correct if you're not using TypeScript, that stuff is not in the ESLint architecture, which is because ESLint is not architected for that natively. It's just not a concept in the core thing, which means that when you have TypeScript ESLint, the TypeScript plugin, adding in type information, it's slow in part because TypeScript is much slower than ESLint. It does a lot more needy stuff, but also because ESLint doesn't have the APIs for it to optimize, which is why if you use TypeScript ESLint, you have to use specific opt-in presets, recommended type checked instead of recommended, to enable all those typed linting rules because they're much slower and you need a little more config. Well, that's not great. Why do users care? You have this weird situation where the core rules aren't as smart as they could be. Let's say that you're detecting good operations between numbers. Even knowing what is a number, if it's not a literal, sometimes requires type information if it's imported from another file. But then you have to make these decisions do you require type linting if you're a plugin? Do you take that speed and config it? Then on the other hand, you have the native speed plugins, which actually have two really interesting strategies. Biome, with a grant from Vercel, is writing their own type inference engine, which is a large subset of type checking. And then OXLint is just directly integrating with TypeScript Go. However, OXLint is Rust, TypeScript Go is Go. So OXLint typed lint rules are actually written in Go, which means in OXLint, you now have a second form of lint rule, a Go lint rule, rather than a Rust.
Yeah, I forgot that was the case. That's wild.
Yeah. So that's one of the advantages today in this year 2026 of writing a linter in TypeScript, which is that the TypeScript Go API for things like linters is not yet stable. They're still working on it. And the legacy TypeScript API, well, it works even though it's not as fast. So we're still using the TypeScript legacy API.
And we have some time to off-ramp that too, because TypeScript 6 is going to be around for a good long while until they feel ready to offload or onboard new compiler APIs.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that Flint will end up being one of the early adopters of the stable API once they really start to, expose things that we need.
That's cool. Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the architectural decisions from like a developer point of view? Maybe starting with one of the first things that developers have to do with a linter, which is to configure it.
Boy.
And I think people are used to, if they've used ESLint before, you can use a JSON file or you can use like a JavaScript module. But do you want to talk a little bit more about how configuration used to work like in ESLint and how that compares to Flint?
Sure. You two have done your research, I can tell. You're also users of all this stuff. It's nice to talk. Yeah, so back in the day, ESLint had what's now called the legacy or ESLint RC config, which could be either JSON or JavaScript or YAML, fun fact. And ESLint RC had a lot of issues, as what happens when you have the same thing lasting for many, many years. You learn the hard way all the things wrong with it. ESLint RC is now replaced with flat config. Flat config, I think, also has some issues, but nowhere near as many as ESLint RC. Flat config is only JavaScript. Other linters now have JSON or I think sometimes JavaScript configs. The problem with the way that ESLint configs work is that they're not typed. You have string keys and then plain old JavaScript object, POJO values. Flint's config is fully typed. It has each plugin, like the TypeScript or the JSON plugin, export an object that has some presets, as we call them, that you can opt into, and then also a rules function, which takes in an object that's fully typed, so you get nice IntelliSense, and each of those object keys are a rule name, and then the value is a well-typed description from the rules options defined in a ZOD or standard schema, which is so nice. Like if you type check your Flint config, you are told when you're using the options wrong, even before you run Flint and it fails ZOD validation. So I'll pause there. Like that's the first big thing that like people have been clamoring for well-typed schemas for years and we just went ahead and did it.
Nice. That's really nice to hear. I think one of the pain points I've personally run into is I'm never quite sure like what rules are actually being used. Like if I'm using Airbnb recommended or something like that, it might have a list in the documentation, but that's usually where I have to go is like, in order to figure out what rules are actually being used in my project, I have to go like hunt for them because it's not really apparent.
Yeah. So there are a few things that actually both ESLint and Flint are doing for that, and also a few things new in Flint. For starters, ESLint has this awesome config inspector. I think Anthony Fu first made it. So npx at ESLint/inspector, config inspector, I forget. It's this beautiful little local web app where you can see the root files, like what rules and plugins are enabled for them, and then you can see which files have overrides and such. Really wonderful. But part of the problem is that ESLint doesn't establish very strong standards for how plugins need to or should set up their config presets. In Flint, we've built a lot more of the plugins into core, like the actual mono repo with Flint has, for example, the Vue plugin for now, till the community takes it over. A lot more standardized docs, like we all call our presets logical and stylistic, also logical strict and stylistic strict, which is a whole other thing. But then we're also planning on, in addition to having an equivalent config inspector, making some sort of plugin registry, kind of like a subset of NPM or NPMX, where you can, as a plugin author, register that your plugin is relevant in certain criteria, like the React plugin is relevant if React is a dependency. And then when someone, let's say, creates a new config or looks on the website with their packaged JSON data, we can see, okay, these are the core ones recommended, and then also React and so on might be useful to you. So we're kind of hoping that like we can standardize and make a little smooth that horrible experience of I have a new project. What on earth am I supposed to do with the linter config?
Yeah, I know in the past, I think in Karma, you had to name a package a certain way, and then it was like hoovered up automatically. I hope that's not what's happening, because that was painful. I think Karma backed away from that too at the end. Before I think Karma's completely archived now. It's a read-only, I think, project, but I assume that's not what's happening here.
We've considered it. ESLint plugin dash or ESLint dash plugin dash is kind of the standard for ESLint plugins. Mm-hmm. But my guess is that we'll end up just having it be like a keyword or something.
And do you mean, Eric, that you didn't even have to put anything in the config? If it just detected that package by that convention, it would just use it.
What Karma was doing at the end is they would write out like a warning being like, hey, we didn't break you, but we did this thing automatically for you. You really probably should consider putting it in your Karma config
Wow.
instead of us hoovering up this plugin automatically, which apart from it being completely magical and like now your config is implicitly coupled to your package JSON or whatever floats your boat, it's also like a vector for malware potentially.
Yeah.
So like I could just name a package something and then it gets pulled in and run dutifully by a framework.
That's wild. At first, I thought you meant that they like surfaced it automatically as a suggestion somewhere. No, we would never do that. Flint configs, people say they want magic, but what they really want is convenience. Magic is an inherently illogical or unpredictable concept, and that has no place in dev tooling, I think. What I really want is like the convenience and explicit intent of like, if you want something put in your Flint config, we can just make it easier for you to find that thing.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yep. That's exactly what I would want to hear.
Yeah, I actually did not know about that config explorer, so I'm going to be using that like after this.
Yeah,
Sweet.
that's a hot tip. I did not know about that either. Yeah.
Yeah. I needed that in my life like a lot.
Yeah. We're looking at having a Flint plugin for Flint configs be built in. This is something we recently started talking about in GitHub. There are a bajillion things you can do, quote unquote, wrong, slightly wrong. Like you can enable a preset twice by accident, copy pasta, merge conflict. You don't realize it's twice in a large file. Or maybe you set a rule that's already enabled to the same thing it's enabled with. Or you enable two presets where one is a superset. Like they're just like the list goes up. So we're thinking of having, I don't know, like how in Knip there are like little config warnings of like you didn't need to set this explicit, like that type of thing in the config itself, both as a vector for making the configs a little easier, and then also as a way to get people onto our website with a lot of docs where we're hoping to like really clearly document like what's the right way to do this config stuff. So I guess that's kind of two answers right there.
Nice.
Yeah, that plays into like with like a good DX, like something that I think Rust did really well was having like super actionable error messages. Like not just like this is error here, this line. It was like, hey, this is a problem for these reasons. Let me enumerate it in the error text. And here's a link if you want to read more. So I was like incredibly inspired by that. So I've been trying to do that in my own projects. And, anytime there's an error, be like, okay, here's a whole bunch of context. Why we think this error happened. And here's a link to some docs.
I love that. Thank you for mentioning. I forgot. That is another answer to the question. It's like you've read my blog posts. Yeah. So the art of a good error message, as you've said, it's tricky but important. And lint rules in particular are really hard because if you give people already hate anything that tells them they're wrong, which is literally the purpose of a linter. They hate nitpicks even more. And again, so lint rule needs to, in the error message, provide enough authority so that people actually pay attention, but not too much authority because it can't be overly dominating. Then people resent it. It needs to explain what's the problem so that people understand it's a real report, but not too much because then people don't read it. It's hard. ESLint reports typically just have like one line. Some rules will use new lines manually to add more details, but like that's the exception, not the norm. Which means that a lot of ESLint rules, especially older ones, would be very authoritative. And now half the developers I talk to hate ESLint for that not great reason. The other linters like OXLint do a very wonderful job of having like these beautiful, full, detailed with syntax highlighting and squigglies across the file, which means that the reports are super verbose and at scale that like gets hard to work with. So in Flint, we do the best of both worlds. Rules for every report must provide 3 areas of information: a primary line, an array of secondary lines, and then an array of suggestions. And our CLI, depending on the way or location where you run it, will choose which of those levels of verbosity to give. By default, or just like in CI, I think, we keep changing the defaults. It'll just give you the ESLint style 1 line per rule, along with, file and line column. But then you can also have this detailed presenter where it gives you that beautiful color-coded with the primary and the secondary and the syntax highlighting in the terminal and everything. Furthermore, on top of that, the terminal also has a watch mode. So for people who aren't using like a project-wide LSP situation, if they just like it in their terminal, we have a watch mode with our integrated cache where as you change files and updates, and that's opt-in. We have another opt-in thing, which is the interactive mode, where it'll just show you one file at a time, kind of like the interactive mode in like vtest or jest. And then you can use your keyboard to navigate between files. So you get this nice focused view with whatever level of detail you want. So the CLI is this huge exploration of all these different ways that we think are actually important different use cases that different people want to run their linter in.
Yeah, that's cool. So it really is sort of tailored to the use case and context in which you are doing your linting, which is nice. So I was just thinking that one of the issues that I ran into on our team when we used to use ESLint was that we kind of had an internal rule where we would not enable warnings because people just tend to ignore warnings with ESLint. What is Flint's philosophy on like errors versus warnings?
No warn, only error.
Only error. Okay, yeah.
Only errors. I've been resisting the urge to make jokes around names like that. But yeah, warnings. See, a lot of developers want warnings in ESLint not because they need something to semantically be different from an error, but because they want the yellow squiggly in the editor. It's one of the common reasons. And to which I would say use your editor's customizations to downgrade your lint reports from red to yellow. That's a feature in editors like VS Code and WebStorm. But yeah, the problem with warnings, the main one I have is that it trains people to ignore lint complaints or to ignore things yelling at you in the first place. You end up with just dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of lint complaints over time. And that's not good. A lint rule, if it's important enough that you have it turned on, it should be respected. There are other features you can use to say that, okay, it's on, but we don't have time to deal with these reports. There have always been inline config directives like ESLint disable next line. Those are in Flint too, and other linters. And now ESLint has this bulk suppressions feature where you can move all those to a JSON file so that you can't add new complaints, but you don't have a bajillion comments in your code. That's Flint's philosophy, that we don't even allow warnings. We just show up as a different color in the editor, and then we'll have a suppressions equivalent that maybe the warnings or the reports will show up as like blue instead of yellow or something and not fail to build. I really want people to respect the linter as a first-class citizen of tooling and not treat it as just like some annoying little thing to shove off to the side for later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the Excalibur code base, we have as far as I know, there's no warnings. It's only errors. But the one that we suppress the most often is no floating promises. But that is because we were like, okay, we know what we're doing here. We know that we're doing a fire and forget. It's okay. This one can be floating. It's all right. But
shame on you. How dare you bring me here? No, it's reasonable. There's a whole other podcast episode and blog post in the making of like why fire and forget both is literally not correct and sometimes the only correct thing to do.
Yeah. We're making games, so it's like do we block on something that's not important, or do we start the machinery so that the game moves faster?
Yeah, because when you're running at 60 FPS, any kind of delay on something needs to be like a critical delay. But yeah, so there's ways. What I'm hearing is that it's errors only, but there will be ways to do like a migration. Like if I need to migrate a project and I'm going to get a whole bunch of errors that I need to suppress, there's going to be a way for me to suppress the errors that I need to like work through, right?
For sure.
Cool.
That's not even a Flint specific thing. That's just good linting practice nowadays altogether.
Awesome. And so you did mention documentation, and I think one of the ways that I've run up against this when using ESLint is I'm not a linting expert, and if I'm new onto a project, I might get a lint error. I'm like on a project I haven't really worked on before, I'll get this lint error, and I'm not familiar with like what the error means, or like what is the way I'm supposed to do it versus what I'm doing right now, and then I have to go and search for it. Like I got to Google it because there's not a link in the error message to go find the lint rule. And it sometimes feels like I have to go to different repositories even because it might be part of a plugin and that plugin has its own docs. And then I got to go find that. Are you doing something different with Flint? Like how does that documentation story kind of work?
We are doing something with Flint somewhat different.
Cool.
There is some tooling in the ESLint ecosystem for good, even great docs websites. The problem is that there's no standard around them and different projects use different tools. A lot of projects just have markdown files on GitHub and there's no one standard website builder. So you have these beautiful websites, like anything from Otameshi is beautiful. Also, perfectionist.dev is its own other beautiful thing. Shout out the Perfectionist plugin. But again, like all of my plugins are just markdown files in GitHub. So ESLint plugin applies some standardization to things. ESLint doc generator generates or helps enforce those markdown files. For Flint, we're doing that plus more. For starters, because in Flint, we have so many more things built into the core of Flint, like so many more plugins in the monorepo, they have a very standardized experience for users. But we also are we've searched all the different docs generation and validation features from these other things and merged them all into one place and one Flint doc generator plan. So like every file will have the things you might expect in a typical file. They have examples of it, a high level explanation, deeper explanation, when not to use it, which is actually a really important docs piece. Looking forward to when we work on our interactive playground. The goal is that all the stuff you love and love with quotes and come to expect from a Lint docs page is just kind of standard and enforced for all the main stuff you would use as a Flint user.
Nice.
I'm a huge fan of interactive playgrounds too. Like that was a recent addition to our stuff, and that just improves one, like bug reports, because they can send you a link to the playground, and two, like it's just fun to like noodle on something and be like, what would this look like? And it's a safe space. No one's watching. You don't have to commit anything, and you can play around, and that's always nice.
Hell yeah. And what's wild to me is that the existing playgrounds are actually really good for a lot of linters. ESLint, TypeScript ESLint, OXC/OXLint, Bio, like everyone has a really nice playground. This is not a hypothesis that Flint is working on. To me, this is just table stakes now that you have to have it to be an accepted linter.
I'd believe that for sure, %.
Awesome. You did allude to this, and maybe it's time to dive a little bit deeper into this, but we talked about different contexts in which you might use linting. One is obviously I'm in development mode and maybe I have the watch mode turned on. And so as I am working in my editor, these errors come up and I'm dealing with them. But then at some point, I'm ready to git commit and push like to my PR. And at that point, I probably have GitHub Actions or I have some other sort of CI/CD process going on. Does Flint work differently from like in dev mode versus like CI mode? How are you thinking about that?
We're trying to make those differences as minimal as possible because they're actually not too many differences. Like the way you report things is a little different. Like you want to have some sort of nice workability with like, the GitHub annotations stuff. I think the main feature to work on for CI is caching. We have a local cache that works really nicely, as I mentioned. So we want to explore some nice way of getting that to work in GitHub Actions. Hopefully just using the native GitHub Actions cache. That's a thing everyone else has been using for years. It's tricky though, because then you have to kind of figure out where the cache comes from and how to invalidate it. But ideally, yeah, it should be a very fast lint process. It really brings me and a lot of people pain that most of the time when you're linting in CI, you are rerunning linting on your entire project or entire NX or Turbo affected graph. Turbo repo. And that's just a colossal waste of time and resources.
Right. Yeah. And that's always a perennial fight too, like, because it's always the case, or at least for me, it has been the case that any project like will start and balloon the amount of time it takes to run in its CI until it becomes completely untenable. Like I have a project right now that takes a full hour for reasons that are unfortunate. So like, at a certain point, like you're like, okay, we got to develop engineering time because that's a full hour is wasting people's time very measurably. Like I can whinge at stand up being like, I literally spent all day fighting with CI because it takes an hour for me to figure. Like it works locally, but it takes an hour in CI to find out that I'm wrong for one reason or another, and it's very sad, a very sad situation.
Yeah.
We didn't talk really about formatting yet, but like I use or have used Prettier in the past, and I think Aux format is a new one also by the Void Zero team. Because linting does have to do with formatting, like the two are kind of related. How is Flint kind of thinking about formatting?
Yeah, I see linting and formatting as siblings who are tired of being confused for each other, but they also get along well. Yeah, so a linter is not a formatter. Like a lint rule is a terrible strategy, technically speaking, to format, but the experience of having two separate tools, what a pain in the butt. What an annoyance. So Flint takes a similar approach to Biome and more modern folks, which is we do have a separate kind of plugin thing or pluggability point for formatters, but we are not the formatter. We'll run the formatter, in Flint's case, currently just Prettier right now. On every file that you lint, we unify the ignores because the Prettier and the linter ignores are basically the same most of the time. And we also do the same thing with type checking, which is actually something OXLint does too, where we will we'll take the type information stuff from TypeScript that we were using, the same project APIs, and then we'll also find all the type errors from them. So we'll reuse a lot of the work that they did, which means that instead of having 3 separate jobs or tasks or what have you in CI for linting and formatting and type checking, and 3 separate commands and 3 separate dependencies in your scripts and package JSON dependencies, well, now you just have one. And you might still have explicit dependencies on, let's say, Prettier and TypeScript, but like the actual act of configuring them is just you run Flint and it does it all for you.
That's nice. One of the challenges for a while was the getting your ESLint and Prettier to not fight with each other. One said this and the other one's formatted it so that another lint rule was violated. And then you got kind of in this like battle of the formatter and the linter not agreeing with each other. Like I'm assuming that that's a solved problem in ESLint, I imagine, and the Prettier. But I just remember that being an extremely frustrating period of time.
Yeah, you get the infinite editor changes, so you can see it flipping back and forth like a fan. Yeah, we don't do that anymore. That's awful.
So one thing that I realized that we haven't quite talked about yet is with ESLint, for many of the rules, you can fix them. You can run ESLint, is it -- fix, or even in the editor, you can say like, fix this problem. How does Flint work with fixers? Like, does it have that same idea?
Yep. Not that much to innovate on here. I'm sad to say that we couldn't think of much better. So yeah, you run it with -- fix and it fixes. We don't yet have a VS Code extension or any other editor extension, but when we do, we will have the same stuff you expect from all the other ones, like format on save and fix on save type stuff. The one kind of tweak that we've added in is cross-file suggestions and maybe also cross-file fixes. Where let's say you have a spell checker plugin, like the CSpell ESLint plugin exists already. Projects benefit a lot from spell checkers, as an example. Other examples of like when you do cross-file stuff would be like a design system where like you move from your CSS file to your TS file or vice versa. Right now, ESLint actually declined the feature to be able to have a rule suggest changes in another file. We have that as a first-class feature. So like the spell checker plugin has the option to give you a suggestion to add a word to your dictionary in your cspell.json. We also actually, I should note, have that in the CLI, which is a feature no one else has, where suggestions have IDs and you can run in fix mode plus also fix these specific suggestions. So you can use them as code mods.
That's cool.
Well, that's nice. And me personally, I probably require the spell checker because I'm ruined for spelling. There's no chance. Like, I'm pretty sure Justin, one of our contributors, and Kamran and Jess follow after me in fixing my spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes.
Yeah, it's all good.
Wouldn't it be nice if there was a tool?
Yeah, wouldn't it be nice? I should probably turn that back on.
So, this is a TypeScript podcast. We've talked a little bit about TypeScript and that there's type-aware linting as a first-class thing, and it's fully TypeScript-first in Flint. But have you implemented some new rules, or what kind of things have you seen now that you've got this experiment going where everything is type-aware and everything is TypeScript-first? Is it allowing you to do some new rules or like variations on ESLint core rules that couldn't have been done before? And what kind of have you seen with that?
Yeah, there are not that many new rules. Basically, any new rule we would want to implement has also been implemented or at least suggested on TypeScript ESLint. I'd say that it's kind of the ease and the seamlessness of the configs and the plugins and the presets that have really been the main benefits we've seen from unifying typed and untyped. For starters, the concept of literals, or like getting the literal value of something, like is this a number or specifically the number 42 or whatever, the fact that every rule just uses the same plumbing to get static values like that means you don't have these weird extension rules that you have to massage, and it's just the rules are better by default. Like they catch more things, they're more reliable. The like really common example that drives me up a wall is anything that tries to deduce that something is some known type, like using a for I in versus a for of loop over an array. You just can't build that well without types information. Like you don't know what's an array if it comes from another file. Mm-hmm. So either your rule has false positives or it has false negatives without type info. So it's just like the rules are better. It's higher quality. And then also we've taken kind of the communal learnings of how to organize configs or plugin presets. So basically every plugin in Flint has logical strict, stylistic, and stylistic strict. And that separation of logical and stylistic is so nice to let people choose whether they want to be nitpicked in that way. I'm really excited about that. It's something we've been doing in TypeScript ESLint for a while.
Okay, could you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm not familiar with that separation. Like, what's an example of like a logic rule versus like a stylistic rule?
Yeah, so just conceptually, logical rules are those that directly find bugs or known bad practices. And stylistic rules are those that detect inconsistencies or things that aren't directly bugs, but will probably indirectly lead to them. The really common logical rule would be like no floating promises, where you set up an async task and don't do anything to handle it. And if you're in X case, maybe you don't want to wait for it. Maybe you should just put it in some, background task handler thing somewhere, which is what you should do, Eric, FYI.
Okay, I'll look at that.
Yeah, side meaning get issue. Or like another one would be an unused variable is a really common one, where like TypeScript can catch that for you, but it's not very configurable, and maybe there are patterns where you do or don't want to use it. A stylistic rule would be like the classic type versus interface. It doesn't matter which of those two you choose, just choose the one consistently and do it for your whole code base. Or like people always used to name interfaces with an uppercase I in front of it because that's what you did in like C++ and C#, and that's not a thing for TypeScript developers. Like linting against or for that, if you really want, is another one.
If you're a C# developer and really want to live in that same world, I suppose you can turn that on.
You do you, fam.
Yeah, exactly.
But like what we saw in TypeScript ESLint is that we were hamstrung by only having the logical or recommended configs, where we wanted to enable all these really good and important stylistic rules like type versus interface. But like half the users don't want that crap. They're not writing code to be artisans. They just want the damn thing to work and not have bugs. So then they would yell at us and complain that the linter, or even worse, they don't know the difference. So TypeScript is yelling at them about which construct to use, and it's just a horrible experience for them. So really, really important to have those two things separated from each other.
No, for sure. And I remember that being a constant refrain. And I was like, does it have TS in the error message? You got to go check yourself. You got to look in a mirror. The error is between the chair and the keyboard.
Nice.
I might put that on a t-shirt. That's a good one.
It's a pebcac, right?
Yeah, pebcac. Yeah. Possible error between chair and keyboard.
Yep, that's right. Okay. Is there anything that we're missing that we haven't talked about yet that you're like really excited about and want to make sure that people know?
Well, yeah, so alluded to it earlier. In ESLint land, it's been around for a while. A lot of the older rules have very definitive don't do X, or maybe slightly better, prefer Y messages. Our rules, as a kind of rule, no pun intended, basically always say what the problem is. Instead of don't do X is X will cause Y issue, prefer Z type stuff. It's a small thing in terms of implementation, but big for user experience.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a huge categorized list of all the lint rules in the ecosystem that predate Flint, and it's like 1,500 or up to 2,000 almost now. Out of those rules, we categorized which ones are actually still relevant and not, say, superseded by the formatter. And within those, are they logical, strict, stylistic, and should they be provided by Flint? Are they universally applicable to anyone doing whatever plugin they relate to? So Flint itself, currently it's about 400 lint rules implemented. Probably going to get up to somewhere between 800 and 1,000 by the end of 2026. And those lint rules are categorized, and this is all on the Flint website, into a really, really nice delineated set of plugins. Those plugins themselves are categorized into 3 groups: core, focused, and incubator. Core is the stuff like TypeScript and Markdown that just anyone with any GitHub project writing TypeScript almost certainly uses. Focused would be like more specific areas like browser versus Node. Then incubator ones are kind of, well, the community should own this, but we don't have a community yet. So Astro, Next, React, stuff like that. So by having this really nice delineated set of plugins with well-delineated presets, we're hopeful that to answer your earlier question, it's a lot easier to figure out what am I actually supposed to be enabling for my project.
This is very exciting stuff. When do you anticipate people can like start hacking on it and working with it in their own projects?
Depends on how pre-alpha you're willing to go. We are nowhere near ready for anyone to try. We don't even have a VS Code extension. The logo isn't even final. By the way, if anyone's great with graphic design, please, for the love of God, help me. Definitely end of 2026 is my tentative, emotional, hopeful target. We roughly have ESLint compat. Like all the things the ESLint does, we want to do. That's like table stakes for us. And then maybe end of 2027 would be like we figured out the performance thing. But if you want to try Flint now, you basically would be like contributing to Flint. That's the only area of avenues we have.
Awesome.
That's cool. Well, people can go do that if they want to. Where should people go do that if they want to kind of learn more about Flint and get involved?
Well, flint.fyi is the URL. It's real cute.
Yeah, it's a very good domain.
My last project was create.bingo, and once you start having cute domains, you can't go back. We do have a Discord. I'll say not everyone in the project is on the Discord, so we try to keep most actual like project issues and such discussions on the GitHub, which is it's linked on the website. The actual org and URL is github.com/flint-fyi/flint. Yeah, Flint. I don't know why I'm forgetting this. It's my project. We do have a team, though. I want to shout out. There is like a page listing them on the website. Alfred, Eli, or Elisha Duck, Barry Michael Doyle, Kamsu. And then we also have some advisors, most of the rest of the TypeScript ESLint team. So Brad Zacher, Kirk Wavelinger, Ronan Amiel. Also, I think Michael Faith from the ESLint ecosystem is joining. Like, we actually have a good number of people. So if you prefer like just discussing or like working with someone, we got a bunch of folks who, are great to work with. We're happy to help you out.
Nice. Love it. Well, how do you see the future of Lint? I mean, you talked a little bit about your roadmap, but like where are you at right now in terms of features and what's kind of coming up next?
Well, answering the second first, in terms of features, the CLI is basically feature complete. Not fully, there are always bugs, but like it's there. The cache works, watch mode works, the different presenters and interactive and such modes. Alfred has been doing a lot of work with the rest of the team on fleshing out the virtual file system, and then we've been all kind of pitching in for stuff working on top of it. So I think within the next couple of months, the pluggability of Flint will be pretty good. My hope is that like summer this year, we'll have the VS Code extension and LSP support built on top of that VFS so that you can actually use it as some sort of alpha user, maybe alpha by the end of 2026. There's a lot of work to be done though. And I'll say that like we haven't even touched on all the things like the glossary or like the unit test snapshots and stuff. Like there's just so many cool things we're trying out that it's really hard to predict when it'll actually be like gilded or even golden.
Awesome.
I think there are two possible futures. I am extremely confident in all of our hypotheses except for the performance one. A lot of the explorations from Alfred and team have gone almost nowhere or hit severe blockers in getting native speed and JavaScript interrupt fast. It's a really hard problem. The OXC project has to do it because they got the third category lint rules, custom JS ones, and I'm hopeful that we can piggyback on whatever they do if we don't get it ourselves. But there's a lot of work to be done. Either we get performance workable at scale so that like hundreds of thousands of files plus code bases can run Flint quickly, or our ideas live on in another linter. I think those are the two main possible outcomes for this. And honestly, I don't know which one I prefer. It'd be real nice not to have to maintain a Lint project long term.
Well, I wonder if there's like, for like native speed, I wonder if there's like hacks you could do where, I mean, some of these like more bespoke runtimes are doing wild stuff like compiling JavaScript to a bytecode and optimizing a bytecode. So you're still writing JavaScript / TypeScript, but what's running isn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps or hurts.
It's on. We have a very large list of things we want to try. That's one of them. That's for sure. Like I'm one of the organizers, Google Confident. We had Oliver Metters talk about Pour4. Like that stuff is great. Another cool thing, actually from Dino, there are optimizations you can do to the AST abstract syntax tree. That's the format that you parse code into to be linted. Dino, I believe they do like cool stuff with prototypes to have fewer properties on each node object. I also would love to see some sort of like, we don't actually parse the AST into nodes. We parse it into like this one huge bytecode array or some such. And then each node using these prototypes things like dynamically computes the parts of the AST as you get to them, maybe with caching. I say that because like the big bottleneck right now for native speed AST to JavaScript that we've seen is just the act of creating JavaScript objects. It's slow. JavaScript objects are not optimized. And there is a proposal in JavaScript TC39 land, structs, which currently does not have significant momentum to get done anytime soon. But my God, until structs, which are much more memory efficient and fast, come in, like you have to do weird stuff behind the scenes. So like within the hope of the future where Flint can be fast, my strong suspicion is that we will find some way to hyper-optimize our objects that doesn't make it an annoying pain in the butt to write lint rules, perhaps using the strategies I just mentioned.
Awesome. Well, that's really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be really cool to see where it goes, and I hope people go check it out. Just to before we close out, where can people go to learn more about you and follow what you're up to?
Well, hi everyone. Thanks for learning about me. My name's Josh. I go by Josh Goldberg on all the things. Blue Sky, GitHub.com primarily. I've been in open source for about a decade. I'm actually about to no longer be an independent open source maintainer. I'm starting at Sentry in February, switching open source back to fun side project time. If you want to talk to me, happy to chat with you on all those things, especially if you want to help with Flint or just have opinions on linting, hit us up on the Discord or just talk to me. In particular, love anyone who's excited about contributing code or docs or design. Like that stuff would be great. Please do.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Josh. We're super excited about Flint, and we hope that some of these hypotheses get proved out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun talking to you too. It's a great podcast.
Thank you.
No Minnesota long goodbye today?
We could do a Minnesota long goodbye. I love that.
Yeah, we usually do it for ourselves, but it's
Very
fine.
cool
We
with
can
that.
we can definitely do a little long goodbye.
I don't want
Yeah.
to pressure.
Yeah, let's do a long goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we could talk about is how you see Flint kind of impacting the landscape, right? Because I guess that's kind of interesting to me because you alluded to, maybe one of the outcomes of Flint is not that we have a brand new linter, which creates another choice paralysis, but like what if you prove out some of these ideas? I think some of the big ones in my head are, can we have rules in native TypeScript? Like, can I write native TypeScript rules, but then have them run at native speed once they are, executed, so that DX would be nice. And then also some of the stuff you're doing around, a lot of the other DX stuff like config and making it easier to do rules and error reporting and things like that would be awesome to see sort of slurped up into some of these other linters. Like, well, yeah, what are you thinking about that?
What you just said. I mean, it would be great. Like, we have back channel, like, little DMs and such between like different Lint people. And like, I know the Flint posts have been referenced by like the OX Lint people recently in Void Zero. We're all friends here. So yeah, I mean, that would be great. I'm sorry, if you're looking for more nuance, you hit the nail on the head. It's just, we hope that happens.
That's cool.
I think my take too is going to be, I think a lot of the DX is where innovation is going to be found on top of obviously performance. But I think DX is really the area I think a lot of, not even just linters, but like software in general can improve on. And especially around documentation. Like, I'm reading the focused plugins page and I'm like, oh, this is hot. I'm like, this is great. Like, oh, there's a Node.js one, or there's a performance one. Well, I want to turn that one on. Like, yeah, let's go look at the performance one. Like that's cool. Like having this like a la carte, mode where there's not like 400 million categories. Like here's the 8 that you care about maybe. It's really cool. And I also like the ones that are like, oh, these are for a framework that you might use. You might be using Nuxt, or you might be using Astro or Vue. That is also cool. I like that. I do like your logo though. I like that.
Thanks. I want to iterate on that logo. For those who aren't visually looking at it, it's a flaming heart atop a brown. Well, actually, Eric, do you get the point of the little thing there? Do you get it?
I have no idea, but I like it. Is it like, are you making fire from like Flint and Steel or something? Or
yeah, Flint like references. No, it's the brown log as an editor squiggly. See, this is the problem. It's such a cute idea, but I don't have the design chops to actually make it apparent.
Yeah, well, that does make sense now. Like the editor squiggly, I think I'm just used to it being very aggressive, and it was just so friendly.
Nice.
The vibes got in my way of interpreting it as a squiggly.
The other thing I was just thinking of that we didn't really talk about on the episode, but we can talk about now, which is as an end user, as an end developer, are there things that you think Flint makes it easier to write your own custom lint rules? Like, as someone who doesn't really know too much about AST and like how to actually write a custom lint rule, I feel like that was always the obstacle for me and might, continue to be an obstacle with the current linters in the landscape right now. But like making that developer experience easier, like I don't know what the answer is, if it's some kind of DSL or if it's, just having a better education around AST, or like just more examples of here's how to write different types of lint rules. Because I feel like I always started with existing ones, like, oh, how did they implement this rule? Like I think I mentioned before the React exhaustive depths rule. I wanted to customize it so that we could check, are you passing in a tan stack query as a dependency to a hook, and to catch that, because that would always cause a lot of problems with our code base. And so I had to go look and see, how did React implement the React exhaustive depths rule, and then how can I build off of that or customize it to do something very specific.
Yeah. It's a great one. You've previously talked to Dimitri, my co-organizer with SquiggleConf, and he is so against everything I'm doing with Flint. It's so funny. We can't talk about it because it just devolves, and I love talking about it with him. One of the big pushbacks he gives is, I don't care what the lint rule's written in. Just it should be fast and it should work. Why do I care if it's in TypeScript or Rust? Your users don't care. Well, I disagree. No, sorry, Dimitri, to call you out here. There's a good point that users legitimately don't directly care, but I think being approachable and standardized the way Flint is does have downstream benefits. The fact that we have a modern, fresh code base And one, not 50 different plugins with their own different ways of doing everything, means that it's a lot easier and a lot more predictable to learn about the rules, especially if you look into source. It's also a lot easier for AI to train on this. I'm sorry that we almost went a full episode without talking about it, but in this day and age, especially for something like Linter, it's really important to think about how it interacts with agents. Flint interacts with them both in that it's really good for them, especially with the cache. It's a very fast way to give agents feedback or to fix their code, or ideally both. And like the Flint rules themselves are excellent training data. We've basically taken the entire corpus of best practices in TypeScript and code that can be serialized or described programmatically and turned it into a set of test cases and documentation, which I think is wonderful for anyone who wants an agent to create high quality code.
That's a good point. One advantage of being a newer project is your corpus hasn't evolved over time, and you don't have a history, a long history of things that are no longer relevant, which can confound. Ask me how I know, because I get bug issues. I'm like, this hasn't existed for a decade. This method that you're trying to call was removed a decade ago, but it's on the internet. So it's like, okay, some AI generated this stuff, and it wasn't obviously at the time that they were reporting this. It wasn't doing any kind of type awareness, or at least the person that was using this wasn't. So yeah, that's a huge thing, especially with the, good DX helps more than just humans. Good DX also helps all of your tools. You got to go fast. You got to go slow to go fast. Good tests, good error messages, good documentation helps everything go faster, not just the human.
Yeah, I think on this point of like, do end users really care what the lint rules are written in? And I would argue, yes, they do. And the reason I would say that is because imagine how much easier it would be and how much more adoption you would get if tool developers like Excalibur for Excalibur.js or for so-and-so tool can write their own lint rules and keep that in their repo, so that their contributors can work on it who know TypeScript, right? So you don't just have this like one-off package, which is a bunch of lint rules written in Rust or written in Go that nobody except maybe one person on the team knows how to do. Whereas we can more easily allow our contributors to create rules for Excalibur and have them integrated into Flint, right? So you widen the adoption radius of like more people can contribute custom rules for their own projects, like for their own tools and libraries. Because I can think of many different like lint rules that we could write for Excalibur that would be helpful for our users, but I don't know the first place to begin, to do that. And the rules that I would write currently might only work with like TypeScript ESLint, but then they might not work with Biome and they might not work with OxLint. And then that just creates a poor user experience for our developers, because then they're tied into this one sort of lint tool, which they might not be using. Like they might want to use, OxLint or Biome, but then if we're only shipping TypeScript ESLint rules, then they can't do that. You know what I mean? So I would say in that respect, there's an argument to be made for making lint rules more approachable that like people can contribute.
Especially if our users are using TypeScript and we want, as a framework, to provide them lint rules. It makes sense. And the argument about contributors too.
What I'm hearing is there's going to be an Excalibur Flint plugin before there's an Excalibur ESLint plugin.
I didn't want to commit, but I was seriously thinking about it, because I have like 3 that I really want to add. One of them is I'm thinking about calling no floating actors, because a common thing that gets me every time is I forget to add an actor to a scene, and if they're not in the scene, they're not there. So they're just not showing up. I'm like, why is my thing not here?
No floating as a prefix is just it's universal. It's evergreen. Sorry, I interrupted out of excitement.
Yeah. So like no floating actors, I think would be good, unless you're doing an object pool, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm doing this on purpose. I'm making these with the intent to not add them, but to add them later, perhaps. And then the other one I was thinking about is a large amount of our support lately has been like text rendering related, where I want to make a Game Boy game resolution, but you cannot have a high fidelity font in 200 by 100 pixels. Just not possible. But people try it. And if you think about it for a second, you understand there's just not enough pixels to render that smooth S that you would like to render. So you need to do things like, hey, I noticed that you have an extremely low resolution game. Maybe also turn these settings up to like you can have your logical low resolution because you want to make the Game Boy game aesthetic, but you might want to add some more pixels artificially so that you're not working with 200 by 100. You probably want, if you want to render text that looks any kind of nice, you want at least 500 by 500 behind the scenes. You want a little bit more. So there's that one I can think of for sure. That one I like. There's just configuration settings that are incompatible, and it's hard to do that in a way that doesn't fail at runtime or produces an error message that is actionable.
I think you've really touched on kind of not just a specific to Excalibur, for example, truth, but a universal to development truth, which is that the linter is actually a very good place for a lot of things that are hard to build elsewhere. But the problem, I think, with the linter is that because it's evolved so much over the years and it's learned so many things the hard way, we have a lot of people who resent it, which creates this vicious cycle of like, it doesn't get the investment that it deserves to become better, to make people not hate it, to ... But once you start getting these newer products like Biome, like modern ESLint, like Flint, like OSLint, people get excited about it again, and they realize all the cool things they can do with it that would be really useful and beneficial for users and agents, and that's really exciting, I think.
100%.
Yep. Well, I feel like that's a good place to end, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that was really great. That was a really long goodbye. I loved it.
Yeah.
Yay.
Fantastic.
I'm just so excited to have partaken in a sort of long goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's been a dream of mine since your podcast started.
Well,
awesome. There you go. That's right.
Got to slap your knee to indicate that you are done talking.
Yep.
Stretch my back, groan.
And then take another 10 minutes to walk out the door.
That's right. Freeze on the porch.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll see y'all later. Thanks for joining us again, Josh.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at Kamronigus.com, and Eric is at EricOnerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at TypeScript.fm.